Well, a kookaburra tries to laugh as a tin pot trailer falls in half. Your darling wife has had enough of using a bucket for a bath, but you're hardly even halfway there. It took you ages to prepare. In desperation to make it square, you promise her overseas somewhere. Now there's cattlemen in bare feet, big spare ribs with not much meat. Even in June you feel the heat, so give that crocodile a treat. Yeah, jump in the Jackie Creek, if that's the kind of thrill you seek. Hardly a sport for the meek. They lost a retriever there last week. Chapter 23. The Kookaburra tries to laugh as the tin pot trailer falls in half. I've endeavoured to pen songs that feature Australia's natural iconic places, such as Uluru. This was the main reason I decided to go camping in 2001 all the way from Cairns to Frangipani Bay to experience Cape York Peninsula. I'd met a man named Darcy Gallop in 2000 at an Indigenous dance festival at Laura in northern Queensland. At the time he was the administrator of Cape York and was representing the Queensland state government at the festival. I was a guest singer at the festival and very soon gravitated to this character who had pitched a tent on site. It was a dry festival, meaning there was no alcohol allowed, but Darcy didn't let that stop him having a quiet one in his tent where we had a yarn. Darcy was very proud of the fact that his father was an engineer and had a bridge along the main road named after him when the Cape York roads were created. Darcy seemed to know the Cape like the back of his hand and was quite familiar with the characters along the way. He had a humble little cottage just north of Cooktown where he lived with his partner Jackie, who had produced documentaries for the ABC. They had a few acres surrounding their house where Darcy struggled to grow an array of tropical fruit. From what I gathered, it was hardly worth the effort, but it kept Darcy interested. I guess he is in his late 70s by now, so it was good for him to have something to get up for. He had 2 huge Mastiff dogs to keep him on his toes as well. Darcy offered to be our guide on our camping trip. He was into bush poetry, so he liked my songs. So 6 of us headed off from Cooktown. Me and Mary Kay's brother Steve, nicknamed Runt, and his wife Sherry, and Darcy and Jackie. With Darcy's local knowledge, we set off with no fears. He soon proved to be a better 4-wheel driver than I. On some of those tracks, you really need to know exactly where your wheels are, so I got us bogged a couple of times. But I had a winch on the troopy, so it was never too much of a disaster. That is, as long as there was a tree to latch onto within 50 metres. Jackie suggested we hire a couple of cameramen to join us along the way. She reckoned we could make a documentary for the ABC about my songwriting discovery trip, so I promised I would attempt to write a song. I wrote Cape York Peninsula during the filming so they could actually see me writing. By the end of that trip, I had also written Frangipani Bay and Granny's Little Gunya. When we reached a national park north of Cowan, we met an Aboriginal ranger. He was a good-looking young fella and very amiable. Jackie decided it would be a good opportunity for me to interview him about the unusual anthills in the area. I was particularly interested in why they seemed to be facing the same way. They call them cathedral anthills, but apparently that's technically incorrect. They're mounds. Anyway, these cathedral anthills looked like little Westminster abbeys. Fortunately, the ranger knew the scientific answer as well as the myths that have been passed on by the old bush people. As we were filming, a couple of tourist buses pulled up maybe 200 metres away. The older ones in the bus got out and stretched their legs and seemed to be watching what we were doing with great curiosity. As I finished interviewing the ranger, I was beckoned by the people to come over and say good day. So I checked I had a signing pen in my pocket, and off I went thinking, you never know when you might meet an interesting character. There could be a song in this as well. I thought, I'm pretty roughly dressed, but they probably recognise me but aren't sure. After 40 years in the business, I'm pretty used to that kind of thing. When I got to the buses, I could tell they were arguing about something. One old bloke and his wife thanked me for coming over. "You'll be able to settle an argument for us," he said. Here we go again, I thought.
Can you tell us, is that Ernie Dingo over there that you've been talking to?
I was a bit taken aback at first and felt like saying, "No, mate, but they all look the same, don't they, these Aborigines?" But I soon saw the funny side of it and realised I had a great story to tell on my show, along with all the other funny ways that Aussies approach me when they recognise me, or they think they do. On another occasion, a young girl behind a bar in Sydney said to me, "Have you any idea how much you look like John Williamson?" I thought for a change I'd have to have some fun with it, and I said, "Yeah, it actually gives me the shits. People are always saying that to me." To which she replied, "I know how you feel. Everyone reckons I look like Meryl Streep." Then I said, "Geez, I reckon I look a lot more like John Williamson than you do Meryl Streep." She looked at me as if she was thinking, this guy's a bit strange. Before my mates and I left the pub, I pulled out a True Blue sticker and left it on the bar signed, "Love to Meryl from John." I loved the camping side of that trip. Because I snored loudly, I left Mary Kay in the ute while I took my swag and slept under the stars. We were in crocodile country, so I was a bit wary about where I slept. I had this theory that if I placed my swag on the bush side of a big log and not on the riverside, I would be safe. I'd never seen any footage of a croc jumping over or going around a big log to attack anything. Quite confident of my theory, one Australia Day, I mentioned this to Steve Irwin, and he said, "Yeah, but they can come from the bush as well." So much for that theory. One place we camped was the scene of an amazing story not long afterwards. A bloke woke up in his swag with a big croc lying on top of him, keeping his breakfast warm, I presume. It always amazes me how vast this country is. We met the most wonderful characters halfway up the Peninsula Development Road, Dawn and Billy Jackson. Darcy, of course, knew them. They lived on Wolverton Station, one of the most northern stations in Australia, and a distance of 1,890 kilometres northwest of Brisbane. Their galvanised iron station house was more like an old wool shed. It had no lining inside the walls, and the lino seemed to be laid straight on top of the earth floor. If there was concrete underneath, it was far from level. The floor waved up and down underneath their bare feet. The inside was completely painted with silver paint. The kitchen was almost completely black from the well-used fuel stove they'd got from some old pub. Billy and Dawn would have to be the most unassuming couple I've ever met. They never wore shoes. I've discovered over the years since that this was the norm up there in the wet tropics. I can imagine how much trouble you would have with feet in socks in such a hot, damp climate. A huge mango tree overhung their roof, covering the house with rotting mangoes. I don't know why Billy didn't cut it down, because he hated mangoes. He said they just attracted the wild pigs. My neighbours at Springbrook hate them too because the mangoes attract flying foxes. But I love mangoes. I'd soon have a net over the tree if it was mine. But isn't it always the way? You never appreciate something that comes easily. My song, Granny's Little Gunya, captures something of the atmosphere up there at Wolverton Station. Dawn had this warmth that drew her grandkids to her. She's no longer with us, and Billy has retired to live in Cairns. The next generation, at the time of living in another house within a stone's throw of the Gunya, has taken over the property now. I do hope someone is living in the old place. It's a museum piece, the real saltbush bill dwelling, just as the cartoonist Eric Jolliffe used to draw in his comic books. I've never seen another farmhouse quite like it. I am so thankful that Darcy introduced me to them. People such as Billy and Dawn are typical of the salt-of-the-earth characters who keep me going as a songwriter. We all love hard-working, down-to-earth, honest people.